The following video is a recording of the PDM presentation given October 21st, 2020. The topic was forecast improvement, an apparent oxymoron. Presenter was Howard Forman, and the presentation was presented by the APICS New Haven, Massachusetts Minutemen, South Shore Chapters, and the Southern Connecticut chapter of ASQ.
Hey, welcome everybody. This evening we're going to talk about forecasting improvement, an apparent oxymoron, or why can't we learn to forecast? Are any of you forecasters? If you want to just let me know with the chat. Nobody's a forecaster. Terrific.
I took weather forecasting the first year in college. Not hard forecasting.
The thing about forecasting, it's never easy. No matter what we do, it seems we just can't do it correctly. We normally forget the basics and we try to get very elaborate with the forecast and make changes. And what we find, it's very difficult to get a good forecast. Now, we're going to try to do an interactive presentation. If you've never done polling, you're going to get a chance to answer some questions, and then based on your feedback, we're going to talk about it, and you may understand why certain forecasts just don't work that good. Have you ever heard the term oxymoron? Forecast improvement is an oxymoron. It's two terms that basically contradict each other. And if you look, there's a whole bunch of terms in forecasting. How can your forecast error grow smaller? If something's growing, it's going to get larger. Negative growth. Being a good forecast accuracy. All of these are reasons, or all of these are terms that are oxymorons. Now we can look at forecasting, and there's some rules of forecasting. The first rule of forecasting is that it's always wrong. The second rule of forecasting, measure the error. The larger the error, the worse your forecast is. If the forecast is bad, it impacts profitability, it impacts resources, productivity, and customer service. Because we're not doing it correctly, we plan incorrectly. And obviously, it has a major impact on the supply chain. Now, there's actually a third rule of forecasting, and that is that you have a 0 chance of being correct. How many of you are familiar with Alfred E. Neumann? He was a forecaster for Mad Magazine. His philosophy was, what me worry? And he basically said, what's the problem? Let's tackle and resolve and fix the problem so we can get a better forecast. We know we can't control customer buying patterns or the outside environment. And I think what's been happening the last, 8 months has proven that whatever you forecast is probably not going to be correct. We can try to influence the forecast. We can do things like demand shaping, promotions, but that doesn't always work. So the more we try to forecast, what we find that it's very hard to predict the future. And if we don't predict the future correctly, it's going to impact profitability. Let's take a look at what one company says about forecasting. Fluctuation in demand, your volume. If you can't figure out what you're forecasting correctly, your financial results may be impacted because they realize it's difficult to forecast. The mix, what you sell, is very hard to project. And whatever you think you're going to sell, you're not. If you can't meet your production targets, it may impact your business. You may have difficulties obtaining resources. Your manufacturing, assembling, and testing will be impacted. And what happened, it's going to increase your costs. How many of your companies are facing these issues right now because of the virus? You think this is something that's fairly new? These problems have been around forever. Matter of fact, this company is Intel. And if you've ever read an annual report, you will see statements like this telling you that there is a problem with their forecasts. And by the way, this was written about 10 years ago. And it's still a problem for them today. Every company says, we have a great forecasting process. And what do? You start with collecting and comparing historical data. If you look at your historical data, how clean is it? How good is it? Do you have mistakes in your data? Do you have wrong products being shown? Perhaps you shipped the wrong product. And if that occurred, have you corrected it? Extrinsic and intrinsic data. How good is the data that you're getting from your customers? Are your customers telling you what they want to do in the future? Interest data, things like promotions. How many companies give you a promotional forecast? Gee, next month we're going to have a 2-for-1 sale, but nobody told the planning department. And all of a sudden the demand comes in and it's double or triple and you can't plan for it. Where are you in your product life cycle? Are products being phased out? Are you putting in new products where you have to build ahead of the game? What's happening things with returns? How are you handling them? And then things like qualitative. Is your management overriding the forecast? And quite frankly, every quantitative forecast should be overwritten because management has more information, more current information. So if we were forecasting a product today, how good do you think it's going to be based on what's happening in the economy today? So if you're selling toilet tissue and your demand is up 700%, what do you think the forecast is going to be next year? Are you going to be able to figure that out correctly? So the one thing that we have found out about our great forecasting process, it doesn't always work. Just about every activity in the forecast is subject to problems. We need to figure out what we can do to improve that. And we're going to talk about some of these problems. But let me begin by asking you a simple question. In your company, what do you forecast? Now, every company should really be forecasting 4 different areas. Total revenue dollars. And then based on that, they should be forecasting needed resources to see if they can make it. Future inventory levels. Do they want to build inventory or do they want to shrink it? And then forecast demand either by the item or SKU, by location, by family, by market direction. How you answer each of these questions, how you prepare your forecasts, will make it either much more effective, but if you're not using each of these 4 areas, you need to ask why your company isn't doing that. So forecasting is more than just looking at an item or family level. We need to consider all levels. And if you notice this pyramid, we have something like 8 different levels of data. Are you forecasting 8 levels? Or are you basically forecasting just the product, the item number, or maybe product group? Remember, it's fairly easy to forecast your business direction or forecast dollars. And even product groupings, you can normally do a fairly good job. But when you get down to part number, it's awful difficult. When I was doing forecasting years ago, we had a forecast by distribution center. We were happy if we could have a 33% error at the DC, about a 15% at the product group. And when we were looking at the total dollars, we had to be about 98% correct. That was our goal. So within your company, are you doing these type of forecasts? So let's get into the polling. Let's see. If you've never used polling, it's really simple. You should be seeing on your screen in a moment, well, I'm going to say launch poll. What you're going to do is answer either 1, 2, 3, or 4. Within your company, what do you base the forecast on? Is it order book sale, the order book date, the order requested date, the order promised date, or the order ship date? And we'll take about a minute or so to answer this. By the way, if you're unsure, you don't know what your company is doing, pick the answer that you think is best. There's still about 10 of you that haven't answered. If you can just, we'll give you a few more seconds. The more people that answer, the more interesting the results get. Okay, we got about 32 people responding. I'm going to end the polling. Can everybody see the results on your screen?
Yes, I can see.
Okay. So what are we showing here? 28% of you are using the order ship date. 31% are using order promise date. 19% order requested date. And the balance, 22% order book date. Well, here is where a lot of you are having problems with your forecast. If the customer places the order in February and they don't ask for the item to be shipped until May, that means next year you're going to show the demand to be in the month of February, not May. So you're going to over forecast February, you're going to have too much inventory, and under forecast May. If you do order requested date, that's probably the answer that you should be using, because that's when the customer wants it. And this afternoon, people were saying, well, the customer doesn't give us sufficient time. Well, that may be the case, but it's when do they want the inventory? So in theory, if they're ordering in the month of March this year, they're going to want it in March. If you give an order promise date, well, they wanted it in March, you didn't promise it until April, you didn't ship it to May. So if you were using the ship date, you were going to be 2 months after they needed it. So you should really take a look at your demand data and figure out why you're not looking at the order requested date. And in some cases, if a customer calls up and they place an order and you can't deliver it and they cancel the order or they don't place it, are you picking that up as demand? So just by thinking about where the demand is and putting it in the proper period, you will begin to improve your forecast. I haven't answered, somebody wrote a note, yes. I'm not sure. Yes, it should be in the order requested date. Is that what you were saying? So let's look at another example. Do you adjust for product substitution when preparing the new forecast? And what we mean by product substitution, the customer wanted a 2-liter bottle of soda. They didn't have it, so they substituted 2 1-liter bottles of soda. Where are you going to show your demand? The 2-liter or the 1-liter? Still have about 10 people that haven't answered. Okay. %50 of you are saying that you adjust for product substitution. 20% are saying that you don't. 17% say it's not an issue. I'm really not sure why it wouldn't be an issue. I would think it would have to be an issue, because if you're substituting a product and you're showing the demand to be what you shipped, then you're going to be forecasting the wrong product next year. It's important to figure out what the customer wants. So if they wanted the 2-liter bottle and you didn't have it and they were willing to substitute, that would be fine. But next year, they're still probably going to ask for the 2-liter bottle. Except a portion of your customers may actually find they like the other product better. So you may lose some demand on the one item and gain it on the other. So here again, if you want to improve your forecasting, take a look at where the demand is, what you're shipping versus what the customer is looking for.
We had two interesting chat responses, Howard, one of which was about a helicopter manufacturer who doesn't substitute one helicopter for another because the US government was very unhappy with that, so it's no issue. Another person said it's a bill to order, so there's no substitution.
Okay, I guess I can accept that answer. But even there, if they don't like it, and you substitute, that may be fine. But what are they going to ask for next year if it's a repeating product?
Sure.
Now, do you adjust for the gain or loss of customers when you prepare the forecast? Now, over the last 8 months, a lot of companies have went out of business. Are you going to be losing that demand? Or are you going to gain new customers from other? So far, we only have about 19 people responding. Still about half of you haven't responded. Okay, a few people are still responding. 71% of you have said that you do adjust. And obviously that should be the correct answer. If you don't realign your demand data, if you don't take out those customers that you've lost and add those new customers, then obviously your forecast next year is either going to be too low or too high. And it's not always easy to go in and figure out which customers you've lost. And in some cases, the customer may have just moved their distribution center from one district to another. And with mergers and acquisitions, you may lose it or you may gain new customers. So it's hard to figure out. And what are you doing when your customer has shut down for a couple of months because of the virus? So if you were Ford or GM and your production facility was shut down in April and May, and you were supplying them, are you going to show demand, no demand in 2021? So you have to make sure you go in and figure out what's happening. Do you adjust for unexpected demand activity when you prepare the forecast? Uh, 53% of you say that you adjust for unexpected demand. 41% of you say you don't. And it's like 6% aren't sure. Well, if you're not adjusting for unexpected demand, what's going to happen next year? So you really need to take a good hard look at your demand to figure out why you're not making corrections. Now, how would you like to be the forecaster for toilet tissue, hand sanitizer, where all of a sudden you're up 700%? If you're not adjusting for that demand, what do you think 2021 is going to look like? Anybody here working for a consumer product company? Okay, there's a question. How do you define unexpected demand? Unexpected demand is when you get an order that wasn't expected for a quantity that is much larger. So under real life conditions, you get a forecast from a new customer for 10% of the forecasted demand. You weren't planning for that. What action do you take? Is your supply chain reactive enough that it can go out and adjust for that? In today's environment, there's an awful lot of companies out there that are really struggling with forecasting because the orders are coming in such a great quantity, they don't know what to do. Or what's even worse, their customer base is closed. So if you were supplying the restaurant business and all of a sudden all the restaurants are closed and nobody's buying your product, what do you do? Now, a lot of those companies were trying to find other markets, but what's going to happen next year is very difficult to predict. And that's where management has to come in with a qualitative forecast and override the forecast based on what they think is going to happen. Customer returns. Do you ever ship the wrong product to a customer and it comes back? Is that considered to be demand? This one is interesting. 41% of you say you adjust, 44% say you don't. So if you're getting a lot of cancellations, if you're getting a lot of material coming back, the question becomes, why is it coming back? Did you ship the wrong thing? Did the customer go out of business? Did the customer want a different product? You need to figure that out. And if you can't, you're going to have a problem because you're going to over forecast next year because you're going to predict that you're going to sell that item again that came back. The other thing about returns, if you are adjusting, what month do you adjust? Do you adjust the demand in the month it came back? Or do you adjust the demand in the month that the customer asked for it or it was shipped? Obviously, this is going to impact your forecast quite a bit. So I see a couple of comments here. It's not the customer's fault. You shipped the wrong thing. You should book the sale for the correct item. That is correct. And even if the customer ordered the wrong thing, for some companies, it's still your fault, and you should adjust to whatever they want. You want to make sure you're not building an old product. Now, if your company has introduced new products and the customer ordered the old product and they realize there's a new product, they might cancel the order and they want the new product. So are you going to continue to build the old product next year because you think you have demand? That's the issue here. See, there's another comment. Not sure if there's a right answer on adjusting for returns. Well, from my own experience, if you didn't adjust for demand, you're inflating the forecast. If it's small quantities and the quantities average out month to month, then it's not really a major issue. So you have to look at what the product is and why the customer is returning it. If it was a mistake, you need to adjust. If you made the mistake, you need to adjust. If they're canceling now because they're closed because of the virus, well, in all probability, at least hopefully next year, they're going to want that item again. And maybe you don't take action, but you need to do some analysis. Let's see, what else is there? It's not a large return, but how do you ensure service levels? When you're talking about service levels, you don't want to overbuild a product that's coming back too often. What you need to do is figure out, like I said before, why it was shipped in error. If you can figure that out and adjust for it, there may not be a problem next year. And not every item can be figured out, unfortunately. This next one, when you're doing your forecasting and you have a 12-week lead time, what are you using to measure forecast accuracy? Are you looking at the current month's forecast? So the current month forecast was 100 and you happen to ship 100. Hey, we have 100% forecast accuracy. Terrific, great job. But the previous month, the forecast was 150. They dropped the forecast. So really, you're off by 50%. And if I look at 2 months prior to that, the forecast was 200. So you're really off 100%. So it's a different way of looking at things. Only about half of you have answered. Well, 58% of you said that if it was a 12-week lead time, you were going to look at the current month -2, which would tell you then that your forecast was 100% wrong, which is the correct way to measure. For those of you, let's see, 19% said that you look at the current month's forecast. So you're saying you're 100% accurate with your forecast. That's a problem. Remember, when that forecast came out 2 months ago and said 200, you went out and you bought material. You might have hired people that are sitting around now because the forecast is much lower. So it's important to look at when it was initially looked at. So I would definitely look at the lead time. Here's another one. What do you think your forecast for 2021 is going to be? Are you going to over forecast, under forecast, be just about right, or your crystal ball broke? Well, 50% of you said your crystal ball broke. I would probably agree with that answer, depending on the product you make. 23% said you're going to over forecast. I think that depends on, here again, on the product that you make. Only 7% said you would under forecast. And 20% of you said just about right. I'm not sure how I would forecast next year, to be honest with you. There's too many unknowns. So if I'm looking out 1 to 3 years, I have a real issue. But you're going to have to take a look at the product and make your best guess. How do you think you're going to judge forecast success? Who's telling you whether your forecast is good? Is it the customer, the stakeholder, stockholders, management, or your boss? Now, obviously, everybody has a different answer here. I would probably say my boss is going to tell me, but the true answer is the customer. If you don't have the product they're looking for, then it's always the fault of the forecast. If you have too much inventory, it's the fault of the forecast. If you don't have enough inventory and the customer gets annoyed, then your stockholders are annoyed. So everybody has their own opinion of whether the forecast is good or bad. Now, I will say this. I found this quote a few years back. Forecasting is perhaps the hardest job, never complete, never agreed upon as to procedure, input, or interpretation, and it's often incorrect. I would probably say it's always incorrect, but it's probably the most critical thing to do anyway. So you need to look at the forecast and figure out what's going on. and try to make it better. So, does anybody have any questions? John, have you muted everybody?
Yes, but I can unmute them. They can also unmute themselves.
There's
Okay,
also some questions on chat. I don't know if you guys, I had to get up for a minute, but I'm assuming that these are here to be answered at some